This is Unit 2 of my Introduction to Business class, and this unit is all about entrepreneurship and business ownership. My hope is by the end of this unit, my students will be able to come up with some legal considerations and startup expenses that an entrepreneur should think of when forming a business. In my class, they do follow a SBA style format business plan from start to finish, where they will learn major business ownership type startup expenses, the basic legal requirements for launching a new venture, and so much more. If you are one of my teacher friends out there, I do provide you with this guide so that you can kind of structure and hierarchy exactly what it is that you expect will be going on through the next few days. This takes me roughly 4, maybe 5 days to complete, depending on how much work time you give students in class. The unit overview at a glance, we discuss small business industry, startup expenses, business ownership structures, legal steps to form a business. All of my units come with guided notes so that the students have something to be doing while it is time for instruction, so they're not just sitting there staring at me and receiving. And I try my best to break up every single one of these units with activities in between. So it's not just lecture and where they have to sit and get all the information, where there's something that they can be doing to get up and move, or at least start talking to their peers or think. If you're one of my students in my class, then you know that you've picked a business to pursue for this entire semester. By the end of this unit specifically, you'll know what industry your business is part of, what ownership structure you will pursue, what are the 4 legal steps, or at least 4 legal steps, to form your business, what might be some possible lawsuit scenarios that your business should be prepared for, and then who is a franchise company that competes with or is related to your idea, so that you could see maybe that's a possible solution for you to pursue instead of starting from scratch. You'll also come up with a list of at least 15 startup expenses needed to open your business and create a logo for your brand. And it's worth noting all of that is in the guided notes with instructions and links for students to click on. I always say this, and this goes in every single one of my units, and I'm a firm believer in this. Most successful businesses share one major thing in common: they solve people's problems at a price that people are willing to pay. I open with a Pear Deck slide. I use Pear Deck specifically because it allows my students to interact individually with me, especially when it's a student that may be shy to talk to their peers or raise their hand. It gives them a voice where they otherwise may just be that student that stays quiet. But it also allows some of my more chatty students to focus and lock in on the task is at hand. But in this particular one, I have them type out their initial piece here so they think what is their favorite small business and why. I don't let them just say Costco. It's Costco because of their return warrant or their return policy and the $1.50 hot dog and all of that. Once they've thought it out and typed everything down, they pair up with their elbow partner or somebody across from them. And then I'll walk around the room, I'll circulate, and I'll listen for things that I'm hearing. And as I hear something good, I'll ask them quietly, hey, is that something that you would mind sharing out? And more than likely, they'll say yes. And then we share that out. I give them a quick definition. Now, there are multiple definitions for what defines a small business, but in my class, I use it as 500 or fewer employees. I specifically underline it because if that shows up on a quiz, I want them to know what the definition is that I am specifically referring to. Some of the most common industries that are popular among small businesses are as follows: service, retail, construction, wholesale, manufacturing, transportation, and more. When we talk about service, this is a business that provides work or expertise instead of physical products. It's the plumber, it's the barber, it's the salon, it's the nail manicurist. Now, granted, I guess you could argue that the plumber could give you something to go home with, but you probably don't want whatever they're pulling out of your drain. In retail, we're talking about something where the business doesn't necessarily manufacture the item that's being sold, but rather they are reselling something that somebody else makes. For example, when you go to the mall, any one of those stores is probably not actually creating those items unless it's an in-house brand type of deal. Like, for example, using Costco, their Kirkland brand, most of that should be in-house, although it is worth noting that some of that they actually hire another business to create for them and then they slap the Kirkland brand on it. But in the instance of like a Target, when Target sells a specific brand that is not a Target brand, that is retail, where they are selling something that somebody else made. So retail businesses sell products directly to customers for personal use. Construction is pretty self-explanatory. These are the people that build stuff, they repair things, they renovate structures and physical spaces. Wholesale is the idea of businesses doing business with other businesses. That's a lot of business. So, wholesale businesses sell large quantities of goods to retailers or other businesses. Think of, for example, your restaurant supply store. Specifically, somebody that's going to go open a restaurant probably doesn't go to Target to buy 400 spoons, knives, and forks. They go to a restaurant supply company that sells it to them in bulk at a discounted price, oftentimes because they don't have to worry about the fancy packaging. It's usually going to be more just, this is what it is. We aren't really trying to market to you and sell the pizzazz of the packaging. Instead, we are just giving you the product that you need to solve your customers' problems. Manufacturing is the idea of creating things, so creating products by turning raw materials into finished goods. Transportation, these businesses are changing very rapidly in the current times. Transportation businesses move goods or people from one location to another. These could be semi trucks, these could be Uber drivers, taxi drivers, bus drivers, you name it, airplane transportation, helicopters, and more. I then have my students start thinking about upfront expenses. Before they would go to start a business of their own, they would want to know, well, what are the expenses necessary in order just to get this thing off the ground? Think about equipment, supplies, furniture, technology, all of the licensing that goes into just getting a business started. I then show them a few slides. Again, these are all Pear Deck enabled. If you're somebody that's out there watching these slides and you have Pear Deck, great. If you don't, you can still use this and popcorn it out, have students raise their hand or call on certain students or use equity sticks or something else like that. And so in this case, I show a picture of a frozen yogurt shop and I ask my students to list 5 or 10 startup costs that this building or business would need before opening their doors. I usually give them a soft start because they're a little bit confused as to what it is that I'm trying to allude to. And so I'll say, I need chairs and I need a refrigerator in the back for the soft serve. And then I let them go. They start typing. I'll read out a few of the good ideas that are in there and maybe ask a couple probing questions about some of the ideas where I'm not quite sure that that student's grasping the concept on. Following up, we do a pizza restaurant, list 5 to 10 startup costs that this business would need before opening, an arcade, and more. I then have my students take all of this idea because logo design is another expense that a business might need to incur. It is worth noting in 2025, you can make a darn good logo using Canva Logo Maker, and that is what I have my students do. In fact, my business that I formerly had, Feldman Home Services, I actually used Canva Logo Maker to create my logo for free, and it turned out really good, or at least in my opinion, it did. So I have my students create a logo for their business of their choosing, and again, this is one that they pursue for the entire semester. That link is in the guided notes. If you're following along in Pear Deck, students can click on the link in the interactive website as we go. I then have my students use Google Sheets. I do give them a quick crash course on navigating Google Sheets because it can be a little bit intimidating for someone that's never used it before. But I have them use Google Sheets to create 15 different items needed to start their business because they've been thinking about what are those items for another business. Well, now they can think about them for their business. So they research how much they cost, the site where they can be purchased, and then they use the startup cost worksheet that I give them to go ahead and go through every single one of those items. And so they list out what is the name of the item, where did they buy it, how much does it cost, and at the bottom it gives them a running total as to how much the total startup expenses would be just to get that business up and running. Which then leads us to the transition to legal concerns. Entrepreneurs must understand the legal risks associated with their businesses. And so I give students this link that takes them to, I wouldn't say a funny website, but it's a website that allows them to see a variety of different lawsuits that are outstanding right now that perhaps they might even be a part of. And there are some goofy ones in there. So definitely limit the time on this and do let them enjoy because there are some funny ones that they do come across. Which brings us to them getting to think about after they've seen the exposure to that links lawsuits that are existing, then I have them come up with some ideas as to what is a small business in our local area, wherever it is that you live, that would have a realistic scenario that might lead to a lawsuit. I use Pear Deck here. I also might call out. I have students that are dying to raise their hand and say, Mr. Feldman, I know, I know, I know. And usually you'll get the trip and fall, or something fell on top of somebody, or something along those lines. You get a lot of students that'll say, oh, well, a restaurant then it didn't cook something all the way through. Unless it's in sheer negligence and somebody really, really has to be hospitalized and has major medical expenses, I try to shy away from that one. More of the trip and fall types of things or intentional negligence are the ones that I lean into. And so that's a good segue into the idea of business ownership structures, because much of those ownership structures determine your legal liability. So my students do choose a structure based on how they want to file taxes, how they want to protect themselves from legal concerns, and the way that they will participate with investors. So we go into four major structures. It's worth noting that there are more than this, but these are the ones that I go through as they are the most common. The sole proprietor. The benefit of a sole proprietor is it's the easiest to start, it's the least expensive to start. You're taxed as your own person. So, for example, my social security number would be the same as the business's number. We are one and the same. If somebody were to trip and fall in my establishment, then they could come after my house, my bank account, my car, and such, and anything else that's tied to me. The downside to that is that full liability. The upside is that it's easy to start. This would be, and it's also the least expensive to start. These would be things that have low likelihood of being sued. For example, a small shop, a tutor, a housekeeper, a graphic designer, delivery food services, and more. General partnership operates just about the same as a sole proprietorship, except the biggest difference is there's a partner involved or multiple. And so by doing so, maybe you'll have a little bit more favorable lending opportunities, because as having a partnership, you might have more assets to collateralize, or more opportunities for um, somebody having a better credit score or more assets in reserve, or something else that makes them a more valuable benefit to having that partnership in the deal. My personal favorite, and this is what I founded my business as, was a limited liability company, an LLC. The benefit of the LLC is that you've got this invisible veil, this wall that separates your personal assets from your business assets. So if for some reason the business was to do something wrong and somebody came after us to sue, they could sue the business for all of its assets and money that's within it. So if the business had like a car, or it had a business bank account, or it had a shop, they could go after that, but they could not go after the personal bank accounts, the personal home or car, or any type of retirement accounts. That's the main advantage. It's still, depending again on the structuring, we could talk about S corps and all that, but I'm not going to go down that path. Depending on the structuring, it's still tied to your social security number, to where it is a pass through directly to your tax return. And the biggest advantage here is that personal liability protection, and you're also not taxed as a corporation. It is more expensive and extensive to start. It does require more documentation. And if I ever wanted to transfer ownership, it's a little bit more difficult too. This would be reserved for things like construction companies or any other business where lawsuits might be more prevalent. A C corporation is the business that most of my students are familiar with. It's the Nike when I at this point I look around the room and I start looking at clothing or branding that I see on a student. For example, a student might be wearing a cat sweater, like Caterpillar, the construction company, or maybe they're wearing Nike Air Forces, or maybe a student's wearing an Adidas sweater, or maybe a student is wearing a Costco, piece of merchandise or something like that. These are the businesses that are publicly traded, that you and I can own individual shares of ownership in. And they have a board of directors that oversees the C suite, that then makes all the directives and tells how the business will move forward as such. And this actually ties in really well with my first semester personal finance investments unit, because we talk about all of the so this is where I actually segue back into that content from the prior semester, because these are publicly traded companies that you can also make a purchase of ownership into it. The biggest benefit is it has the most liability protection, because it's completely separate as an entity from its Founders, the founders are no longer necessarily the owners. They might still be owners of shares of ownership, but they are no longer the owners of the business. It's the public that owns the shares that is the owners of the business. They can raise more money by selling more shares of stock, and it's easy. I shouldn't say easy, but it's easier to sell the business in the form of selling all the stock involved to a specific person or business to take it over. They can go public and make a bunch of money right out of the gate. The downside is there are high startup costs. Double taxation is also a significant conversation to have. I've hyperlinked in a video that can show students a little bit more about that. There's extensive formation with boards of directors and more red tape, if you will, and they're heavily regulated. I then have my students think about their business idea. What are they pursuing? Which ownership structure would be best fit for them and why? What form of ownership will their business use? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages of this approach? Usually, if it's easy, a small mom and pop flower shop, sole proprietorship. But if you're somebody that's creating some manufacturing position where you plan on expanding and scaling this thing, we probably want to start having the conversation about a C corporation. I then have my students start to think about the money necessary for those startup expenses and what might be a potential next step needed before legally forming their business. Because if they have the money in place and they've listed out all those startup expenses, well, what is the next step? So they start rattling off things like I need to get a permit, or I need to get insurance, or I need to get a building, or I need to hire employees. All of those are great ideas. I give them two different paths, one for a sole proprietor, one for an LLC. Starting with the sole proprietor, and it's worth noting this might vary from state to state. I'm in California, and so depending on where it is you're watching this from, you might have different regulations, but this is the general idea. Create a business plan. That's what this whole class is about. From unit 1 to the last unit, we are creating a business plan that is SBA, Small Business Administration compliant with the government, so that a student could walk into a bank, show them the business plan, and then ask them the next steps. Once they've done that, pick a name for the business. Depending on the name for the business, it might be required for them to register what's called a doing business as, or a DBA, if required. They would do that with the county recorder. From there, obtain those licenses, the permits, the zoning, etc. You would then need to obtain an employer identification number with the federal government, open a business bank account, purchase liability insurance, start making sales, report, and pay taxes. It's pretty straightforward. Somebody that really wanted this and was really hungry could get this done in maybe a day, day and a half. Onto an LLC. You'll notice all these hyperlinks here. A long while back when I was forming my business, I actually videotaped every single step along the way to show my students the process of how to form an LLC. So if you're interested, click on those videos. It'll take you to Instagram to the links of the videos that I created, and it'll show you all of the steps necessary for me to start and form an LLC in California. So here's the big difference. One, again, with an LLC, create a business plan, pick a name, have a dedicated place for mail, because you can't just have that mail going to your house. It has to be going somewhere where there's a representative there at all times. So if you have a business office where there's a secretary or somebody at the front that receives mail all the time, that works fine. If not, you have to hire what's called a registered agent. From there, you would get all the licenses necessary, permits, and zoning. Again, you'd obtain that employer identification number. Where I live, I had to create articles of organization and a statement of information to file those with my state to show them that I'm a legal formed business. I opened up a business bank account. I acquired liability insurance, my accounting software, and then had to start paying taxes once I started making sales. I then ask students, what would be the scariest part of opening a business for you and why? And usually I'll get responses like uncertainty. What if nobody comes? What if people don't like my product? That's all valid. I have them start thinking about that because then I introduce them to the three ways that you can start a business. One, you could go and buy an existing business. Students like this because I have them click on links where they can look at businesses for sale. I have them look at Biz Buy Sell, as well as our local Craigslist businesses for sale. Some of your local schools may not allow them to go on Craigslist, and rightfully so in many situations. But if they do, there is a for sale business area in there. Oftentimes, it'll usually be like gardening landscape equipment, maybe like one of those tow behind pizza oven deals, and all viable businesses. But that seems like Craigslist has gotten a little bit diluted in the quality. So I really do focus on that bizbuysell.com. And then we talk about the idea of franchising. This is the first time that we introduce the world of franchising, where you can actually pay a royalty fee to buy into an existing business. These are businesses like your Subway, your McDonald's, Great Clips, and other businesses where if you have the money up front, you can pay this certain amount of money. They'll come in, they'll brand this place exactly like it is throughout the entire nation or world, depending on the size of this business. And from there, you can now become a business owner of one of these existing businesses. And the last one is starting from scratch. And that's what we're doing in this class. But I want them to be aware of all the different processes and pathways they could pursue. The upsides and downsides, I go through all of these. Biggest one is if you buy an existing business, the great news, you've got an existing client base, you know how the thing works, you've got standard operating procedures, some historical sales data. The downside, you've got to pay the person off more than likely in order to purchase it, so the upfront expenses are high. There might be some client attrition where people leave, and then there's also transfer expenses as well. If you buy into a franchise, the upside, the branding is done for you, the reputation, you've got uniformity, the training is all in place. The downside, you've got significant startup costs, royalty fees. You have limited ability to be unique. You have to do what it is that the business tells you to do. And there also might be potential oversight as well. The benefits from starting from scratch are as follows: great financial potential. In fact, it's limitless depending on how big you want to go. You make all the decisions, you have opportunity for all the creativity, no boss, no manager, but the downsides are abundant. No client base, no branding, no equipment or purchases, no processes, no data, no training, and a ton of upfront expenses. You carry all the risk. So then I have my students apply this new knowledge of franchises, where they take their existing business, go on the franchisedirect.com, compare a similar type of business to theirs in a franchise format, to where they can make a determination whether or not they would choose to franchise or they would choose to start a business on their own. So, for example, if I have a student that wants to do a car detailing business, maybe they want to start it on their own, but maybe they want to go on to franchisedirect.com and use all of their exact marketing skills, pay the royalty fees, get the branding, get the truck, get all the things, and it's done for them. It's automatic. The website is built, the marketing is there, the business cards are there, the flyers are there, and it tells you exactly how to be successful from day one. Upon completion of this unit, students then reflect on that opening slide of what it is that they need to do. All of this is in their guided notes that they have access to work on the entire time. This takes roughly 4 to 5 days from start to finish. If you have any questions, do reach out to me. I'd love to help you. Thanks for watching all the way through. Appreciate your business, and thank you for teaching the most valuable class on campus.